Welcome to For the Love of Books, a podcast by CultureNL Libraries.
Hi everyone, welcome back to what is the final episode of Season 1 of our library podcast, For the Love of Books. My name is Chris Wilson and I'm E-Services Librarian for CultureNL, and we thought we would bring, the last episode was going to be the short stories, Trams and all episode that we had planned, and we did have a couple of guests lined up for this, which was supposed to go out last week as well, but unfortunately they're still unavailable, and we do want to try and kind of wrap up the season, so we are going to go ahead and will just be me again today. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll have a little chat about some short story collections that I'm interested in, and also we will touch on the Trams aspect of it as well a little bit later on in the episode too. So short stories, a thing that's not necessarily for everybody. They are obviously very different from a full-on novel. So what some of the differences for a reader in terms of a short story in comparison to a novel, I would say that some of the big differences is that short stories that I've read tend to kind of focus on a sort of single event or a single kind of scenario, rather than whereas in a novel you can kind of find that it's going through a series of events and there's a lot of kind of development in the story. And whereas the short story can be quite, in the word short, focusing very tightly on one kind of aspect or one kind of storyline, and there are exceptions to that, obviously, but I would say that's kind of, from my experience of reading some short stories, they do tend to kind of have that sort of singular focus on a particular event, and there's a lot of kind of benefits to that as well, in that with a short story there can be sort of sometimes sort of not much in way of fillers, you know, like whenever you're kind of sometimes reading a longer novel, there can be sometimes sections, maybe a kind of chapter, which just feels like sort of filler to kind of make up the page numbers a little bit, and kind of doesn't really kind of feel as if it's got too much to do with the story, and there's not much need for it. The writer in a short story doesn't really have that luxury. They kind of have to go straight in to the kind of sort of bare bones of what they're trying to kind of put across in the short story straight away. So that is a good positive, I would say. It means that you're straight into the action, depending on whatever the story is, and it's kind of means there's no kind of messing about. You get straight to the point, and it's an enjoyable straight away, and you can kind of get into the action with it. The other big kind of benefit, I think, from reading short stories, in particular if you are reading collections of short stories, you can kind of sometimes get short stories that are published sort of in sort of one-off and just on their own, or maybe they're published in sort of magazines and things like that sort of stuff. But you do kind of, there are kind of collections of short stories that are put together by some authors, and they can kind of vary whether they're kind of all by the same author, or they can kind of be collaborations on a theme, that kind of thing. And an interesting thing about that in the collections is, for me, is that you constantly get a different story all the way through. So sometimes, as I've said in the past, I'm quite a slow reader, and if I'm not enjoying the storyline too much, it does take me quite a while sometimes to get through a story. And that is kind of broken up a little bit by a short story collection, because you are constantly kind of changing the storyline all the way through. It's not necessarily the same characters, it's not the same story, it's not the same things that are happening in the stories as well. They can kind of vary quite dramatically. So that is a good way, and I like the fact that what I've found recently is that whenever I've not had maybe a lot of time to kind of sit down and really get into the bare bones of a novel, a short story collection is quite good for just if you're just wanting to kind of get something read in a kind of short time, but you don't have the time to kind of put the dedication, if you like, of reading a whole novel into it. Then you can kind of go with just picking a short story, and you can kind of tend to get that short story done in the kind of one sitting, which I think is quite an interesting thing as well, and it's definitely a benefit. Some there can be kind of cons as well. I would say one of the big cons sometimes for me is that if you do start to really enjoy a short story and you're kind of really getting into it, and then it's over, and you're kind of left kind of thinking, oh, I wish there was more to that scenario. I want to know what happens next. And that's sometimes a little bit of a con of a short story, is that they are kind of over fairly quickly, and you more than likely not find out much more about them, and it can be kind of a short experience. And like I say, that can have its benefits, but it's definitely a downside if you have really enjoyed a character and a scenario that you're kind of getting into, and that is one of the kind of downsides of it. Another aspect to short story collections, as well as I think that I was going to try and explore a little bit, was character development in short stories. Are they as memorable as a kind of full length novel? For me, character development can be very difficult in short stories. Obviously, they are very short, so the character isn't. I don't always feel that the characters are actually the main focus of the story, and it's sometimes more about the scenario that the characters are in that's really the main focus. So characters, actually, I feel in the short stories I have read, tend to be the kind of background rather than the kind of forefront, which they normally would be in the novel, and the kind of the actual scenario that the characters are in is the more important factor that's involved in the story. Obviously there can, again, like most things, there are exceptions to that, for the character can be quite the sort of most important part. But I do think that they do kind of take a little bit of a backseat. And for me, they don't tend to be too as memorable as the kind of main big novel character. And whether that's because you don't have as much time to discover about them and kind of get a sort of real sense of who they are and things like that, I'm not too sure. But I do think that they definitely do kind of fall a little bit into the background, a little bit of the importance of the short story, and it is much more about the scenario and what they are doing and how they kind of deal with the scenario that they're in is a much more important factor in the short story kind of genre. Some of the short story collections that I was going to mention to you guys aren't necessarily kind of well known collections in any way, but it's ones that I've had a look at and I've quite enjoyed, and I find quite interesting, just because it's authors and things like that I'm a big fan of. And the first one I was going to mention was a Canadian author. I think he's Canadian, called Douglas Copeland, and he's an author. He's an artist. He's done various different things. And he has written various full-length novels, such as J-Pod and Microserfs and things like that. And he brought out a short story collection a while back now called Bit Rot, and it's a mix of short stories and also essays as well that he has written. And the short story collection in it they're quite interesting. They focus on technology and how it's kind of influencing life and how they're kind of getting used, and I look in technology going forward and future and things like that as well. I really like Douglas Copeland as an author. I think he's quite witty, and I often read his books and think that I kind of get a lot of the little kind of jokes and kind of scenarios that he mentions. They make sense in my head. Like I relate to what he's writing quite a lot of the times, and I do kind of find that a lot of the time. And his Bit Rot collection was quite interesting. I haven't like I say, I tend to not read the whole collection in one go, so I haven't quite finished the whole thing yet. But the ones that I have read so far have been quite interesting stories, and I have quite enjoyed them so far. The other one, I mentioned that I was kind of starting to have a look at this one in the last podcast, which is the Neil Gaiman short story collection Trigger Warnings, and it's a great collection of short stories that I've read so far. I've not quite read them all yet, but so far they're very, very interesting. And what I like about this collection as well is that it starts off with quite a lengthy introduction by Neil Gaiman, and he explains a bit about the thinking behind trigger warnings and how in kind of modern society and modern life you maybe kind of watching videos online, you might get a sort of art saying that you might kind of find this this footage disturbing, that kind of thing, and he kind of puts that into like what would happen if we had those trigger warnings in books as well, and that's what this kind of collection's about. It's kind of they're sort of dark stories for the most part, and he gives these little trigger warnings at the start of in this introduction as to why, like a kind of brief thinking behind the story and where it came from and all that sort of stuff, and it's very interesting how he's kind of come up with that, and it's definitely worth a look. The stories are very varied. From reading I haven't got to it yet, but I think there's even a Doctor Who story in there that he had written as well, things like that. So they're quite varied on topic and very interesting looking to me. And the third one that I was going to mention isn't a collection. It is a short story in its own right, and it's called The Shielding of Mrs. Forbes, and it's by Alan Bennett. And I read this short story at the start of this year, and I was reading it for an event actually. We were going to try and do a walking book group as part of our Love Life, Love Libraries programme, and so we read the kind of short story for that, and it was a very interesting read. It is literally only about 80 pages long, and I think that I found that I'm more interested in reading quite a lot of the full-length novels that I have read. It was in those 80 pages, Alan Bennett manages to cram in so much that happens in it. There's quite a lot of different characters in it. It focuses on a family, and there's a sort of deceit, and there's kind of keeping secrets from everyone, and not kind of letting people know what's happening, and it's all kind of, it's very, very well done, and it's a kind of, every character I think in it just about has some kind of secret that they're hiding from other people, and it's an interesting take on this kind of family unit that seems as if from the outset that there's not these kind of things happening, but it's all kind of very, very kind of under the surface. You find lots and lots of stuff that they're kind of hiding from it, kind of sort of public view, if you like, from everyone else, and it's very, very interesting, and it's a great story, and I would highly recommend that you have a look at it if you can. So that's the kind of 3 short stories that I would say that are kind of, for me, have stood out, and the ones that I have read, and it's definitely an interesting topic, I think, the short story collections. I would love to kind of find out if you guys have listened to any short stories or read any short stories, and what they would be. So if you do have any kind of short story recommendations, why don't you can go on our Twitter account at LibrariesNL and let us know what you've been reading, and what short story collections stand out for you. That would be really interesting, and it would be kind of a great way how to get a bit of interaction with listeners of the podcast as well. So do feel free to do that. Now, we did mention at the start of this that the episode was called Short Stories, Trams and All, and the guests who were going to be part of this were Judy and Drew from eLibrary, who have got a little bit of a sort of sketch, if you like, that they do based on a short story. I'm not going to try and replicate what they do for it, because it just wouldn't work. But what I will do is tell you a little bit about what it was they were doing. So, and you may possibly catch it in the future. I think they do it as a kind of thing at some of their events that they do in every library. So you might catch it at some point if you're lucky. It's based on a short story within a collection called Come On Get Aff, which is by Alan Morrison, and it is a collection of stories about a tram conductor, and it is available on our BorrowBox service. So if you do want to kind of read through that and see what's happening there, as you can imagine, it is kind of based in a sort of, it is kind of written in a very kind of Scottish way by the title "Come On Gaff," and it's definitely kind of. I think a lot of people have got kind of memories of trams in some way, even for people who are born after when trams were kind of a big thing in this area. For instance, you can still experience them at one of the CultureNL venues, Summerlee Museum. I used to work at Summerlee, and I regularly take the tram back and forth from the kind of each end of the site there, and it's something kind of quite unusual about trams, and I think that people do always kind of have a bit of an experience of being on one. So I think a lot of people in this area will kind of relate to that short story collection, and it's definitely worth a look. So do have a check out of that on our BorrowBox service. For those of you who don't know what BorrowBox is, it is our ebook and e-audiobook service. The Alan Morrison book is an ebook, so you can read that on there. And basically, you can download the BorrowBox app onto a device, sign in using your library card details, and then download ebook and e-audiobooks to your heart's content. And it's all free of charge as part of your library membership, so it's really, really good. But yeah, so that's kind of where we were going to go with this episode, and we didn't want to kind of just leave it and not kind of touch on the episode at all. So we thought I'd bring a kind of shortened version of the podcast. Maybe that's ironic with the topic of short stories. It's maybe a shorter podcast than normal, but we kind of thought we'd do that and kind of wrap up the season a little bit. We hope you have enjoyed season 1 so far. And we do have quite a lot of stuff planned for season 2. We're going to have a short break with season 2 starting up. We are hoping to restart the podcast around about the end of July, and then come back on a fortnightly basis from that point, and bring you some interesting stuff. Now, I did hint at it last week, but we are going to have a few special guests in next season, so you will want to kind of watch out for that, and we'll have kind of a few of the normal sort of staff-based ones as well. So there's lots and lots of interesting stuff to come in the podcast, and we hope you enjoy listening on to it. But for now, I think we're kind of going to wrap it up for that. And like I say, if you have missed any of if you have enjoyed the podcast so far, and you maybe have missed some of them, this would be a good opportunity for you guys to go back and have a listen to them. Feel free to contact us on our social media as well and let us know what you've thought so far of the podcast. It would be really interesting to hear what you guys have thought and have your kind of input on what you would maybe like to see going forward as well. That's always a good thing to kind of let us know as well. So probably the best way to do that would be on Twitter with the @LibrariesNL account as well. So feel free to go on there and let us know what you've thought of the podcast, and if we can kind of have any ideas from you guys, that would be fantastic too. But that's all for me for now, guys, and I hope you have a podcast